Ravenswatch might just be my next favorite roguelite game. As somebody who has played just about everything in the genre to death, it is rare that a game blows me away with its mechanics, but if they do this game right, it might just be up there with the greats. All of that being said, obviously this is a review for the early access of Ravenswatch and not the full game, and whether or not this game will be the next big roguelike is absolutely in Playstyles Games' hands right now. As we all know, every roguelike that is considered top tier does something that no other game does, and Ravenswatch is no exception in this case. Like Enter the Gungeon's bullet hell sequences and hard but fair bosses, Spelunky's unapologetic difficulty and the lack of meta progression, Dead Cell's Metroidvania approach and the smoothest 2D combat out there, Risk of Rain 2's crazy diversity and doing it in 3D, Hades' story, heat levels and so on. None of these games are just a better version of something that came before, but a unique take on a pre-existing genre, given a roguelike refresh. Ravenswatch does just that, but for the type of game that we still haven't seen in a roguelike form. Even though it does look kind of like Hades because of the perspective, Ravenswatch combat is much closer to something like Battlerite or V-Rising. And with that out of the way and expectations properly set, let us dive in. First thing that we have to talk about is the combat design philosophy, because that is what Ravenswatch pulls off amazingly well and different than most other games. While you're playing the game, your mindset and thought process is much closer to something like a MOBA or Bloodline Champions, because the precision that you need to play the characters is a bit higher than something like Hades. That is not necessarily better, it is just a differently designed combat system. Ravenswatch really forces you to plan your fights in advance as you're closing in, because your character can only shine if you put them in the right position to maximize their damage and effectiveness, but it also punishes you much harder than most games if you fail to do that. In Hades you have just a few attacks and you can kind of spam them willy-nilly and they don't synergize too well, but most characters in Ravenswatch really have particular ways that you have to use their spells, so the difference between playing optimally and suboptimally is huge. It basically sacrifices the chaos of Hades for the precision of Bloodline Champions. Now, where this becomes really interesting is that there is only 20 minutes per map, so when you combine the potential for efficiency that I was talking about along with a strict time limit, you get a really fun and engaging core game that pushes you to engage with every system as possible, because the faster that you are, the more powerful you get, and no matter what you did in those 20 minutes, you just get teleported to the final boss and you'll have to fight them. So the better that you are in getting through the map as fast as possible and getting the power-ups, the easier of a time you will have in the end. And while the time limit is not a big factor in the earlier difficulties, the harder that you put the game on, the game will ask you to be more and more efficient with your time. This is already a really fun base, but there is another mechanic that adds a layer to complexity in how you have to plan your runs, and that is a day-night cycle. Lots of characters have abilities that work completely differently during the day and during the night. There is a character that becomes a werewolf at night, there's a character who becomes a single target damage dealer instead of an AoE damage dealer during the night, and a few more. What this does is it forces you to actively plan your routes ahead. For example, when you're doing a little quest to protect this house, you know that the final stage will be the hardest, so if you're playing with the Scarlet that I'm playing here, you really want to time this part of the quest to be during the night so that you can beat the werewolf, because the werewolf allows you to heal and survive this onslaught. And on the flip side, there are easier characters like Aladdin or Beowulf who don't require you to make those decisions, so if you don't want to juggle a lot of additional mechanics like the Siren's different stances, Scarlet's forms or Pied Piper's rats, you really don't have to. But if you do want to dig deep and you really enjoy playing the games that mechanically challenge you, you also have the option to do so, and that is one of the best things about the character system, combined with the day and night cycle. But even with the best system in place, the game wouldn't be fun if the characters themselves weren't fun to play, and that is what we're gonna talk about next. At the moment you have 6 characters to pick from in this early access version, meaning that even though there is only 1 out of 3 maps out at the moment, there is a lot of game to be played if playing the same map over and over with different characters and builds is something that you enjoy. I would even go as far as to say that playing different characters does feel like playing a different game, which means that once every piece of content is out, this game will have so much replayability even once you clear everything in the game. And to top it all off, unlike something like Risk of Rain 2, you don't only have items, but you also have something akin to talents for every single character. And with those talents you can actually pick how you want to build your character beyond the stats that you get from items. If you have played Heroes of the Storm, it is something like that. but with every level they are randomized because this is a roguelike game, so that you can create more builds depending on the run. The enemies are also really well designed for the amount of them that you encounter at the same time. They all require you to pay some amount of attention, and certain harder enemies will have abilities that you will either need to dodge or save your escape abilities or you will get destroyed. They are not particularly complex, but considering that you're fighting like 15 of them at the same time later on, they don't need to be. They just have to have clear and telegraphed threats that draw your attention, and that is exactly what they do. Just like I have the ability to ask you to hit that like button if you're enjoying the review so far. The only situation where I feel like the game sort of breaks is late in the run when you get your ultimate. They're incredibly strong and they're usually AoE clear, so you can get into stupid situations on purpose and easily get out of them with ults. And with some characters like Scarlet, who has 2 forms, you can use your human ult just before you transform, and then when you become a werewolf you have the ult right away. It is a minor gripe though, but what worries me is that with next 2 areas they might not balance well around this. If they balance enemy health pools around the ultimates, they might be too tanky and grindy to kill normally, but if they don't design it with ultimates in mind, there will just be pushovers once you have the ultimate up. So my hope for the game is that they just nerf the ultimate so that they aren't as much of a I win button as they are right now. Besides that though, everything about combat and the character design is absolutely on point. And one last thing before I move on is I would just quickly like to describe just how different every character is, because it is incredible that they managed to fit in so many different playstyles and so many different difficulty of character into a game. It really makes you feel like Overwatch. For example, if you're playing Scarlet, the Red Riding Hood character, you're a mobile assassin. You get cooldown resets for killing enemies with your AoE dash damage spell, which really incentivizes you to layer enemies HP for those sweet sequences of 4 or 5 dashes. But if you were playing the same fight with the Siren, you would need to stand in place and get as much damage as possible without moving, since you get stronger the more that you stand in place, and the enemies work great for both scenarios. And while there are characters that make you make a lot of different micro decisions on a per fight basis, there are also characters like, for example, Aladdin, who gets to have 3 wishes during the whole run, and those wishes give you huge benefits, but you have only a limited amount of time to use them. So if you're not a player who wants to mechanically express themselves a lot but likes making those big decisions, you could always go for a character like that. And that is what I find really impressive about the character system. They are not just different ways to play the same game, they are literally a different game by themselves. There is also a co-op option, but I didn't play that yet. I will disclose that I did get the game key from the publisher, but that doesn't impact my review in any way, shape or form, and I bought the game for my partner to play co-op, so I'm reviewing this game from a perspective of somebody who has spent money on it. But with all of that being said, you will notice that the Steam reviews for this game are mixed, and that I, who generally approaches the games very critically, is singing praises for this game. So why is that? The reviews are mixed because it is early access with just 1 map and 1 final boss. You can beat the game technically in 30 minutes or an hour when you play it for the first time. And as it stands right now, I have to say that it is one of the most bare bones early access releases that I have ever seen in terms of straight up content. But the reason why I am comfortable dropping 18 euros for this game is because of the width of the content that is in right now and not the depth. You get 6 incredibly unique characters and a baseline for a game that is setting up to be amazing, even though what they have so far is basically a huge demo with some extras like additional character and 10 difficulties. The difficulties do make a difference and make the game more fun to replay, especially once you get corrupted enemies, reduced healing and buffs to the final boss, which makes it more difficult. But if you're looking for a full-on game to play rather than a really interesting combat sandbox, then this is still not something that you should buy, at least not yet in early access. That being said, if you are like me and you just enjoy great combat and what I've said sounds appealing to you, you're getting early into a game that will, of course if they do everything right, probably be one of the best roguelike games in the future. I just love how the game forces you to make hard decisions and plan out your routes, and how the game completely changes with different characters, and the fact that you're not getting punished for getting more power but in fact are encouraged to go through as fast as possible and get as powerful as you can, unlike something like Ravenbound, which really makes you make hard decisions whether you want more power or not. And while that is a great tactical decision for somebody, I just want to get as strong as possible by being fast. And if you are still holding on until they release the full game, feel free to drop a sub, because I will definitely be making a full review once the game is actually out. Thank you very much for watching, drop a like if you liked the video, it is very much appreciated, and I will see you next time.